chasing me. Christmas Carol, chapter, 4. The Ghost of Christmas Past. Not long now. I might even be able to get chapter 5 in, but I think I'll still leave that till do by itself. It'll be just a very short one of the last one. Anyway, here we go. Chapter 4. Stave 4. The dark phantom which Scrooge had first spotted in the distance that was drawing nearer appeared to be gliding on air slowly, gravely, and approached him ever so silently. Once it was near Scrooge, he bent down upon his knee, for the spirit carried with it gloom and misery. This spirit wore a dark black cape and hood, so large and so all-encompassing that nought of the spirit's face, body, could be seen at all, except for one outstretched hand, which was bony and skeletal-like. I'm adding that bit. I didn't say that, but I mean, you know. Am I in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come? Again he has to ask. The spirit did not answer other than to point onwards with his finger, or hand, or the finger on his hand, whichever way you want to word it. Scrooge asked, "Are you about to show me shadows of the things which have not yet happened, but will happen?" "Is that so, spirit?" The upper part of his hood seemed to contract, as though he had nodded. "Spirit, I fear you more than any other spirit I have seen, but as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to be another better man from what I was, I'm prepared to bear your company with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?" "Well, gee, I don't think I'd speak to him after he just said, 'I'm going to bear your company.'" How rude. But anyway, I digress. Again, the phantom was silent. "Lead on, spirit. I sense we do not have a lot of time." The phantom glid ahead of him, and it seemed to pick up and carry Scrooge on the shadow of its cloak as it went past. Shortly there was a city that came into sight, sprung up from nowhere, and then suddenly they were in the heart of it. He recognized many of the men about him who walked about with clinking pockets full of gold coin as they passed, consulting their gold watches. The phantom pointed to one small group. Scrooge took this to be a sign that he should approach them and listen to their conversation, so he did. "When did he die?" said one man with not much interest. "Last night, I believe," said another. "What was the matter with him?" "I thought he'd never die." "He certainly took his time about it," said another, pulling out a large amount of snuff from his snuff box. "Who knows?" said the first with a yawn. I'm going to have to yawn now. I'm sorry. I am really an empath. I am so much an empath. Every time I read the word, I have to yawn. Sorry. I'm going to try not to do it again. "What's he done with his monies?" asked a red-faced man. "Nobody knows. Left it to his company, maybe. He didn't leave it to me. That much I do know." They all laughed at this humour. It's likely to be a very cheap funeral even. I don't know of anyone who would attend it. Should we make a small party and volunteer? "I'll go if lunch is provided," said the red-faced man. Again they laughed. As they parted and went on their way to the next meeting, the phantom was now pointing at another two men who had just met and were chatting also. Scrooge again listened to the conversation. They both greeted one another before one said, "Old Scratch has got his last own at last, hey?" "So I'm told," said the other. "It's rather cold today, isn't it?" "You don't skate, do you?" he asked. No, but it's something to think about." Good morning." They said nothing more and parted ways also. Scrooge was lost for ideas of what these conversations had to do with him. Nor could he think of anyone he knew that might have been the topic of such coldness. But he resolved himself to put them to memory, for he reasoned, if the spirit had wanted him to pay heed to them, they must have some value to him. All the time he was thinking and listening, he was looking for himself, hoping to gain some knowledge about who had died and why everything seemed so cold regarding the death. He checked the time, and then below the porch at the other end of the court. At this time of night or day, he was always there. This was the time for his arrival. He was not there today, but he was there every day. He couldn't find himself. The phantom was now moving away from the courtyard. Scrooge dutifully followed. He had never been into the dark and narrow streets through which the phantom now led him, but knew of their repute. Foul, wretched houses and shops where half-naked, drunken, slipshod and ugly people dwelt. A cesspool of offences, of smells, dirt and misery. Deep into the warren of the wretched, the phantom stopped at a rag and bone shop, where people came to rid themselves of rag and bone, greasy offal and iron for a few pennies. They entered. Inside was much worse than even Scrooge had feared. The floor was piled high with chains, hinges, rusty keys, nails, scales, and all sorts of refuge iron. Sitting amongst the wares like some sort of king amongst his treasures was the owner of the establishment, a grey-haired old codger, warming himself next to a charcoal grill-like stove made of reclaimed bricks, just as he and the phantom entered. So did a woman, carrying a heavy bundle. She was followed almost immediately by another woman, similarly laden with goods. And finally a man entered. On seeing each other, they all laughed, for they all knew each other, but had not travelled there together. "Well, you couldn't have met in a better place," said old Joe, the owner. "Come into my parlour. Yes, a fine place for an undertaker, a charwoman, and a laundress to meet." So these are the three people that have just entered the room. An undertaker, a charwoman, which is a cleaner, and a laundress. The three were discussing why they were there, acknowledging that they probably knew why each other was there, and determining that there was nothing wrong with them being there after having done what they had done, obtaining their items in the all-decided ways which were not exactly legal, but were not immoral or unethical. In view of who it was that they had unburdened. The next determination was to decide who should go first. None much cared, least of all Joe, but the man who came in determined that a lady shouldn't be made to unburden herself, exposing herself, as it were, to the others as a thief. And so he offered to go first. Sorry, that was a long pause. In his way, he would put the ladies more at ease by sharing his finds first. He didn't have much to offer, though. His plunder was not extensive. A seal or two, a brooch, a pencil case, and a pair of sleeve buttons. Old Joe scrutinized the items closely, and one by one he chalked the price up on the wall toted them up, and turned to the undertaker. He said, "That's your account, and I won't give you another sixpence, even if I were boiled for not doing it. Who's next?" Mrs. Dibbler, the laundress, was next. Sheets, towels. A little wearing apparel. 2 old-fashioned silver spoons. A pair of silver tongs, sugar tongs, and a few boots. Scrooge assessed her items and added up the total, much as he had done with the undertaker. "I always give too much to the ladies," he said. "It's my weakness, and that's how I ruin myself. That's your total, and if you ask for another penny, I'll be so insulted I'll remove half a crown." Attentions now turned to the charwoman and her very, very large, heavy bundle. Joe had to get on his knees to help untie it, as it was tied with a great many knots. Finally, he managed to free from the bundle a large and heavy roll of some dark stuff. "What do you call this?" said Joe. "Bed curtains," came the polite reply. "You're not telling me you took 'em down with him laying there, are you?" "I am. Why not?" "Oh, you were born to make your fortune, and you will certainly do it," Joe said. "Well, I certainly shan't hold back my hand when I can get hold of anything in its grasp by reaching out. For the sake of a man like him. Careful, Joe, now. Don't you go spilling oil on his blankets." "You took his blankets too," said Joe. "Who else's do you think? It's not like he'll catch a cold now, is it?" She laughed. "I hope he didn't die of anything catching," Joe asked with concern. "Don't fear, Joe. I'm not so fond of the old codger's company that I'd hang around him for such things if he did." Seeing Joe pull out a white shirt, she continued, "Now that you must check over very, very carefully indeed, Joe, for you'll not find a hole, you'll not find a threadbare on it anywhere. Not a single blemish is on that shirt. It's the best he had, and it is of fine quality too. They'd have wasted it if it weren't for me." "Wasted it how?" "Fools only put it on him to be buried in. But I took it off him again. Calico is good enough for him. And he can't look any uglier now than he did when he was alive." Scrooge had listened to the entire dialogue in horror. He viewed all 3 of these people with disgust and disdain. Worse, what obscene demons they were in his mind, plundering a corpse. The woman was laughing as Joe brought out a flannel bag of money. Paper money. Notes, and gave her the spoils for her deeds. Scrooge was now speaking to the phantom. I see, I understand now. This case of this sad, unhappy man might be my own, and if I do not change my ways, as is my intention— my goodness, what is this?" The phantom had moved him to another place, the room of the unfortunate dead man, who lay on a 4-poster bed, missing its curtains and rings, covered by a mere ragged sheet. Although the room was dark, Scrooge could see that the phantom was pointing to the head of the deceased man. It was covered so carefully, yet it would only need the slightest touch to dislodge the sheet to reveal the face. Scrooge thought about it, but had no more power to remove the sheet than he had to dismiss the phantom at his side. Again the phantom pointed at the head. Scrooge could hear a cat scratching at the door and rats scratching in the walls, all wanting to get inside the room of the dead. Why they wanted in, Scrooge knew but dare not admit to himself. He did not want to imagine, and all he wanted was to be so desperately out of there. Spirit, I know what you wish for me to do, but I tell you I do not have the power within me to do what you're asking. Please do not press me further. Take me instead to a person in this town who felt emotion caused by this man's death. The phantom obliged, and instantly Scrooge found himself in a room with a woman pacing the floor. Stopping each time, she reached the window to look out before continuing her trek across the floor. Her children were nearby, and although they might have sensed her anxiety, they had no knowledge of its cause. She was clearly expecting the imminent arrival of somebody whose visit was of huge importance to her. At some length of time, a knock did come to the door, and she hurried to it to find her husband. There was an unusual expression across his face, a sort of delight, of which he felt ashamed and struggled to express. He sat down for his dinner, which the wife had been keeping warm for him, until she finally couldn't stand it any longer and said, "Is it good news or is it bad?" Bad. No, good." "Oh, I don't know," he replied. He was wrestling with his emotions. "Well, are we to be ruined?" asked his wife. "No, Catherine, we are not. There is hope yet." "Hope," she said. "Only if he relents," she said to her, half to herself. "He is past relenting, my dear," said her husband. "He is dead." His wife now understood the emotions he was dealing with. In her soul, she was so thankful, relieved, and pleased to hear that he was dead. Yet she immediately clasped her hands and then admonished herself for feeling joy and prayed for forgiveness at such wicked thoughts. "So, what that woman told you when you went to see him was true then?" "Yes, it would appear that way." "To whom will our debt be transferred?" "I have no idea," replied her husband. "But by that time we will have the money, and even if we do not, there is scarcely going to be another miser so mean and cruel on this earth that they will refuse us more time to pay when asked. Surely we can sleep well tonight, Catherine, with light hearts." The only emotion that this phantom was able to show him associated with the death of the man beneath the sheet was an emotion of pleasure, relief. "Let me see some tenderness connected with a death spirit, or I shall never be rid of this scene from my mind and the image of that dark chamber." The ghost even, led him through several now familiar to his feet streets. All the while still looking for himself, he was nowhere to be seen. He came upon what he knew now to be Bob Cratchit's house. His wife and children were all there, but not Bob, nor Tiny Tim. Bob's wife was sewing, as were her two oldest daughters. She had laid her work on the table and put her hands to her face and said, "The colour hurts my eyes. They are better now. I can't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home. It must be near his time." "Past it," said Peter. "But he has walked a little slower these past few evenings." "I have known him to walk very fast indeed with Tiny Tim on his shoulders," their mother said. "And so have I," all the children echoed one at a time. "But he was light to carry, and your father loved him so much that it was no trouble No trouble at all. Ah, here's your father now. Placing her needlework once again on the table, she hurried to meet him. Once inside, the children approached, gave him a kiss on the cheek each, told him in one voice, "Don't mind, father. Don't be grieved." Bob perused the needlework and spoke cheerfully, as he could, to all the family. They shall be long finished before Sunday," he said. "Sunday?" asked his wife. "So you did go today, then, Robert, to make arrangements?" "Yes, my dear," Bob answered. And then he said, "My little child," and he broke down all at once. He left the room, crying, went upstairs to the room above, where there was a chair next to a child on a bed. After some time he was reconciled with what had passed and went down again to rejoin the family, quite happy again. Mrs. Cratchit kissed her husband when he came down the stairs. His daughters kissed him, and the two younger Cratchits kissed him. Peter gave him a firm, good, manly handshake. "Spirit, something tells me that our parting is almost at hand. I know it, though I do not know how. Tell me, Spirit, who was the man we saw lying dead?" The spirit now conveyed him not to the room with the man lying on the bed, but to a churchyard. Scrooge thought it was a worthy place, walled in by houses, overrun by grass and weeds. The spirit soon paused and pointed down to one of the graves, the one he was standing on. Scrooge moved towards it, trembling with each step, and he turned to ask the spirit, "Before I draw closer, tell me, these are the shadows of what will be, or what may be only?" Again, all the phantom did was point below him. Scrooge crept towards the tombstone and read upon the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. He fell to his knees, clasping his hands. "Am I the man who lay upon the bed?" The spirit moved its finger from Scrooge to the tombstone, and then back to Scrooge. "No," cried Scrooge. "Hear me. I am not the man I was. I will not be. I must have been. I'm not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been for this to occur. Why show me this if there is no hope, and all hope is lost? Good Spirit, your nature pities me. I promise I will honor Christmas in my heart, and I will try to keep it all year round. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. Spirits all three strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons you have taught me." In desperation, Scrooge grasped at the leg of the phantom, but it was stronger than him, and he looked up to see the phantom's shape change. It shrunk, collapsed, and became a bedpost. His bedpost. He was once more in his home, in his bed, gripping the bedpost. Better still, his bed curtains were still hanging from the rings around the bed. Very short chapter, but I will wait until tomorrow for the finale, because it's Christmas Eve tomorrow. Well, for me, it will be Christmas Eve, as I am posting these at 8 a.m. You are seeing them the day before me. So yeah, this will be... So I think it's only fitting that I read the last chapter on Christmas Eve, as it is Christmas Eve that this story really is all about. So until then, I'll have to get my book out because the last chapter I haven't rewritten. I'm going to read it as it is, but I have to first find my iPad. Anyway, please take care and bye for now. I'll see you all very, very soon.